for the Army Corps of Engineers for the dams, that a judge ordered them to redo their buyout, and they just released it. It's already under suit. State of Oregon, I think, week before last filed suit against it, as well as some other organizations. So how do you end the salmon wars? We went to them and said, what does it take to get us out of court and stop spending all the money we're spending in court on lawsuits? And they said, well, do what's necessary to save the salmon. So we went and talked to every fish biologist that I could come up with, and it's been a lot of them that we've spent time with. Almost universally. And this is whether they work for the government, for Fish and Wildlife Service, Forest Service, whether they work for private industry, for universities, or whatever. Almost to a person, every one of them said the only way you're going to save Idaho salmon is to remove the lower four Snake River dams. They are on the path to extinction. So then the fourth question we came up with after that is, okay, if you're going to remove the dams to recover Idaho salmon, how are you going to make the stakeholders whole? And that was the biggest question, is how you make the stakeholders whole. But we have an opportunity to break this, what's an unsustainable status quo. We can end the salmon wars. As I said, we have spent $17 billion in salmon mitigation so far that the ratepayers of the Bonneville Power Administration have paid. $17 billion so far. The one thing it has not done is restored Idaho salmon. That doesn't include the millions that we've spent in court. I think we can break this never-ending litigation lawsuit, but this proposal is much more than about salmon and dams. But because that's the most controversial part, everybody seems to focus down on salmon and dams. It's a much broader concept about what we want in the future for the Pacific Northwest to look like, because the decisions we make today are going to be the determination of what the Pacific Northwest is in the next 25 or 50 years. We have an opportunity to create our own path forward in this, one that we can shape our future. We can bring abundant salmon and steelhead runs back to our region, which are important economically to the state of Idaho. Idaho has some of the best habitat for salmon of anywhere. In fact, I would say the best habitat for salmon anywhere. The problem is the salmon can't get to it. We can maintain our region's agricultural legacy by creating some certainty and security for our agricultural producers, which I'll talk about in a minute. We can secure a reliable and affordable clean energy future, and we can honor the commitments we have made to our Northwest tribes. Every treaty that has ever been signed with the 16 Northwest tribes, they have reserved their fishing rights. That doesn't do you a lot of good if there's no fish. And the actions that you've taken have taken away those fish. So I think we have both a moral and potentially a legal obligation there to do what we can to try to save salmon. We can secure a more prosperous and sustainable Northwest future. We have an opportunity to expand agriculture in the Pacific Northwest. We put money into the infrastructure that's necessary if you were going to take the dams out in order for particularly the grain growers in Washington to be able to deepen their wells and also realign their infrastructure so that they can pump out of the Snake River. Right now, they pump out of the pools that are behind the dams. And we also deal with the transportation issues in the Tri-Cities and Clarkston, because obviously if you took the dams out, you're going to do away with barging. And so you're going to have to be able to get that wheat down the river. Right now they send about 25 million bushels of wheat down the river by barging. And barging is the cheapest way to get it down the river. No doubt about that. And they have told me if you increase our price of transportation by 15 or 20 cents a bushel, it's going to put us out of business. So one of the things we've tried to concentrate on here is how do you get the wheat down the river at a cost at least comparable and preferably cheaper than what they have to spend today in barging. We've come up with some ideas, but most of all, what it is they're going to have to develop a plan. My job is to make sure they have the resources to do that, and they can. And I'll talk a little bit in a minute about what our ideas are. We also have an opportunity to diversify our clean energy portfolio. We can invest in the clean energy infrastructure and energy storage and grid resilience and optimization that would allow the Northwest to maintain its affordable, reliable, clean energy legacy. And we can diversify the Northwest energy portfolio and also increase the electric system's reliability. And as I said, we have an opportunity to honor the commitments we've made in the treaty obligations, and I think legal obligations, that we've made to the Northwest tribes. What are the benefits from this concept that we put out for the Bonneville Power Administration to try to keep the power rates lower, and try to get them lower, and at least try to keep them from going up? First thing we do is we increase the borrowing cap of the Treasury from $7.7 billion to $15 billion, which they will need. We take the fish mitigation costs that they spend and cap those amounts at $600 million, and in fact it's a net that they would have to pay of about $480. That's about $200 million less a year than they currently pay on fish mitigation. And we would relieve them of fish management. Right now, it's kind of strange that under the Northwest Power Planning Council, which is an arm of the BPA, they're in charge of both fish recovery and energy production. Those are oftentimes at conflict with one another. So it's hard for them to do both of those things. What we do is take their fish management out of the hands of the BPA and say, you guys concentrate on energy. And we put fish management under a new organization. It's the Northwest Fish and Wildlife Council, and it would be manned by representatives from Idaho, Washington, Oregon, Montana, and the tribes that would be in charge of fish management. And they would have the resources of that $600 million a year that BPA would end up giving them to do fish mitigation. Question is, what happens if you remove the four lower Snake River dams with power? Right now, they produce about 3,000 megawatts of power, have the capacity to produce 3,000 megawatts of power. They generally produce in the neighborhood of 15 to 1,800 megawatts, but they do have the capacity for 3,000. It's firm power. That means it can be ramped up and ramped down when it was necessary by demand. It has to be replaced with firm power also. It's not wind and solar. It's got to be firm power that can be ramped up and ramped down. What we do is give the Bonneville Power Administration $10 million to replace that power. Originally, we thought you could probably do it for $3 or $4 or $5 billion. Talking to the power companies and the BPA, they say it's going to take about $10 billion to replace that power. How do you replace it? You can do it with one of the things. I'm kind of a nuclear advocate. Small modular reactors that they're currently working on at the Idaho National Laboratory will be ready to go in probably 27 in that neighborhood. They've already got the license for the design from the NRC. So they're moving along with that, with UAMPS and NuScale in Utah, municipal energy companies. And those will be coming online. They produce about 300 megawatts of power. We put a 6-pack of those at Hanford, which is already a nuclear reservation, that you can locate them there and produce the power that those dams provide. You can also do it with increased battery storage. As I talk to the battery people in this country, I think we as a society are going to be amazed what happens with battery technology over the next 10 years, 15 years. They even tell me that it's not going to be too many more years before you don't see any diesel trucks on the road anymore. Most of them are going to be powered by batteries. The reason is, I mean, the initial cost of buying a battery-operated semi is almost prohibitive right now. That's the thing that's prohibitive. That cost is coming down. But even at the price today, over the length of time of the operation of a semi, the cost of operating a battery-operated semi is about 50% of what it does on what it takes on a semi diesel truck. That's kind of the direction things are going. So there are alternatives. You can do the battery technology. You're going to be able to store energy, and the challenge with wind and solar right now is either use it or lose it. It produces it when the wind blows, when the sun shines. You have about 4 hours to use it, or you lose it. Battery storage is going to be amazing in the future, and what they're developing is what what they tell me. You can also do things like pump storage, which we've been using across the country. Pump storage works very, very well. So there's a lot of ways to replace the energy. That's really not the challenge. The challenge more than anything is, as I said, how do you make the stakeholders whole if you were going to take these dams out to try to end the lawsuits? Let me tell you for just a minute, if I can, about the state of the Snake River salmon. For over 30 years, we have spent $17 billion, as I said, on failed fish recovery efforts. There are more salmon and steelhead are listed under the Endangered Species Act today than in 1980. Today, all of Snake River's salmon and steelhead are listed as either threatened or endangered. And if you look at the numbers, they are headed in a downward path. The next thing that you guys will be able to see, because I got a map here for you to see, is when you look at Idaho's wild Chinook and Chinook salmon, the way that a fish biologist measures a healthy salmon run is what's called a SAR. It's a smolt to adult ratio. And so they measure that, and if you look at if that number is between 4 and 6, that's a good, healthy population that is actually increasing in number. If it's 2, that's a sustainable population, not increasing, but it's healthy. It's not going toward extinction. If it's below 2, it's heading toward extinction. If you take the salmon that come back up the Columbia River, these are the ones coming to Idaho and the ones going to other regions. When they pass over the first 3 dams on the Columbia River and go into the John Day drainage, their SARS rate is about 3.5. That's a good, healthy, sustainable population. When they go over the 4th dam and go into the Yakima Valley, it's about 2.4%. That's still a healthy population. But Idaho salmon then go up the Snake River. They take a right turn and go up the Snake River, and there are 4 more dams that they have to cross. The SARS rate after they pass the 4th dam is about 0.8%. That is a path to extinction, and it is going down. There is no doubt what's going to happen with salmon if we don't do something. The challenge is what do we do? As I said, most fish biologists told us that you've got to remove those dams if you're going to restore Idaho salmon. How do we end the salmon wars? We do it by locking in all of the rest of the dams in the Pacific Northwest that produce more than 5 megawatts of power. We lock them in for 35 to 50 years, depending on when their license comes due. And that exempts them from the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, and the NEPA process, National Environmental Policy Act. It exempts them from those statutes. Almost all of the lawsuits are filed under one of those statutes. Now, I find it interesting that when we talk to some of the environmental groups that are the plaintiffs in a lot of these lawsuits, they looked at this and said, yeah, we can go for that. If you were going to remove the dams to replace salmon, we could go for the exemption on the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, and so forth. There are some extreme environmental groups that are in Washington and Oregon that, I call them extreme, have come out opposed to this. They want to remove dams, they want salmon back, but they're opposed to the exemption of the Clean Water Act and the Endangered Species Act because they want to file lawsuits. We have created a cottage industry where they can actually make money by filing lawsuits. Under the EJA Act, which is the Equal Access to Justice Fund, they will, if you prevail in all or in part of a lawsuit, your attorney's fees will get paid for. And it's amazing that they make money on these. And they don't want to lose that ability for these lawsuits, and that bothers them. So they've come out opposed to this, even though this is accomplishing what they eventually want to accomplish. So that's how you end the lawsuits. You relicense the dams for the 35 to 50 year period, and you make them exempt from lawsuits under the Clean Water and Endangered Species Act and the NEPA process. This will, as I said, this will strengthen the Columbia Basin and the dam certainty, and we won't have all these lawsuits going on with these statutes when they go to relicense dams. We also put a dam mitigation and indemnification program in place, which is, there are some very small dams that are privately owned. The owners say, you know, we don't need this anymore, and I'm just gonna get rid of it. But they're worried about the liability they face and a few other things like that. Where if an owner of one of these smaller dams wants to take it out voluntarily, we'll help them do that and make sure that they have liability protection in doing that. We can restore a free-flowing lower Snake River. It's almost a mistake to call the lower Snake River a river. It is not a river anymore. What it is a series of pools behind dams. It now takes a salmon smolt that is born in the high cold waters of Idaho about 3 times, a little over 3 times as long to get to the ocean as it used to. That's because these smolts are flushed to the ocean. They don't swim there, they're flushed. They're actually headed upstream all the time that they're being flushed, and it takes a current to do that. And when you get to these pools, the velocity of the current decreases. They spend more time in these pools that are warmer water than they're used to. That's not the cool water that's necessary. And they also, in there, they're more susceptible to predators. And of course, predators know that. This is lunch, so that's where they hang out. That's why we don't get as many smolts going down the river as we should. But these dams are fairly efficient. I think they've made them about as efficient as they can. We lose about 5% going down the river. That's 5% at every dam. They have 8 dams to go through. So we lose a high percentage of our smolts going down the river. And then we lose a high percentage of our adults coming back up the river. But the way you would remove the dams is not going to blow up the cement in the middle of the dams. What you do is you remove the earthen berms on the sides of the dam to restore the natural flow of the river. And that cement would remain there, and if at some point in time salmon aren't recovered, this doesn't work, and you could replace those berms if you decided to. But as I said, every fish biologist tells me that it'll most likely do the trick. They're pretty confident that it would do the trick in restoring Idaho salmon runs. One of the other key issues is how do you improve water quality? We create a program that's a watershed partnerships in various regions. One would be here in the Magic Valley, where it would create a watershed partnership and watershed partnership, and these groups, and what exactly that would entail would depend on the different watershed and what was necessary to clean the water. But if an individual, if a producer, decided to join this partnership and do what was required under the partnership, and I don't know what that would be yet, that would be dependent on how they developed it and what was necessary in each different region. What they would be, and then follow it, they would be exempt from the Clean Water Act and the Endangered Species Act lawsuits that they face today because of the increased nitrogen and phosphorus that goes into the Snake River around here. We've got to do what we can to improve the quality of the water. This is the way we would do it. And you got to create a safe harbor for them so that if they're doing what is required under the watershed partnership, that they would be exempt from these things. But it's a voluntary program. The other thing you're going to have to do is deal with animal nutrient management. As you know, we've got a lot of CAFOs in this region of the Snake River, whether large dairy herds or other things. And we've got to be able to handle and manage that nutrient management better than we have done. So we put $100 million, actually with the University of Idaho, to do research on digesters and other things that can benefit our nutrient management, and $400 million with the dairy producers to clean up the animal nutrient management that they face every day. And they're going to be facing lawsuits and so forth if we don't deal with that. That's why I suggest that, this is a future that either we can design or it can be designed for us. But things are going to change. They will whether we want them to or not. We're also investing in community, because communities that are hit the hardest probably would be Lewiston and Clarkston. They would lose their ability to barge wheat down the river. Somehow you're going to have to make it so that these grain growers, particularly in the Palouse, that use the barging system can get their grain down to the Tri-Cities or to Portland as cheaply as they do today. As I said, we have an idea about how to do that, but I don't know if that's the right idea. My job is to make sure they have the resources to develop a plan that will work for them. And that's what we put in here. The plan we actually put in the idea that we thought of is you put $3.6 billion into the transportation and infrastructure bill. If they put that in the Treasury today at interest rates, by the time the dams came out in 2030, and that's when, in this proposal, the dams will be removed, but that's dependent on other things being in place. But that $3.6 billion would be about $5 billion in the Treasury. You could, from the interest on that, you'd have about $200 million to improve the infrastructure that would be necessary, rail and road, and also to help subsidize the transportation so that it's at least as cheap as what it would have been on a barge. But then you've got to invest in the community, because they're going to lose the Port of Lewiston. Port of Lewiston right now has a budget of about $1.9 million, and I think they have 7 or 8 full-time employees. It's an important industry in the city of Lewiston. They would have to develop a different future. What we've said is that, one of the things, as I mentioned earlier, is the increasing battery technology. And the one place that is does the most research on all of this and is the biggest national laboratory with battery technology is PNNL, Pacific Northwest Lab in Hanford. And we would create a partnership with the city of Lewiston, Clark State College, University of Idaho, and PNNL for a research facility at Lewiston to help them overcome the loss of some of the economic impact of Lewiston, losing the barging. So what we're trying to do is, how do you make these stakeholders whole? And that is the biggest challenge that we have faced as we've been going through this. As I said, you can replace this energy. I think we can find alternatives to transporting this grain, but this is one of the challenging things that I have. Since we released this 3 months ago or 2 months ago, the reaction we got is what I would expect. There are going to be people that say, hell no, we're never going to take those dams out, that's just stupid. I understand. That's where I was 25 years ago. First time somebody said, we need to remove the dams from bringing sand back, I laughed. We're not going to take those dams out. I said, we ought to do everything else that's possible to restore Idaho's salmon. The reality is we've tried everything else. If somebody has a magic wand out there, then please show it to me. But so far, we have tried everything that we could to restore Idaho's salmon runs. And believe me, salmon are a huge economic impact in Idaho. So, if we're going to take the dams out, as I said, it's going to take an investment, because we're the first people. There have been like 25 collaborative groups that have said, how do you restore salmon? And they always talk about, well, let's increase the habitat, quality of habitat, or let's do this, or let's get rid of predators, or let's, on and on. And it always comes down to dam removal. And then the collaborative breaks apart, because there's diverse opinions on what to do that. Even with the governor's task force that came up with some great recommendations, they couldn't make a recommendation on dam removal because they just couldn't reach a consensus. And so we sit in this process of just watching salmon and salmon runs go down. But as I said, I understand the concern that North Idaho irrigators, particularly those on the Palouse, those that dry farm and others, they're concerned about getting grain down the river and losing the poor Lewis. Believe me, I understand their concern. The thing that I've found challenging is in southern Idaho, we don't really use barging. Our grain generally goes to Salt Lake, or they truck it to Tri-Cities or Florida. And so I asked myself, what are the benefits of these dams to my constituents in Idaho's 2nd Congressional District? It seems to me that all of the cost of the dams are borne by us. We lose our salmon, and we flush 487,000 acre-feet of Idaho water down the river every year to restore salmon runs. Guess what it hasn't done? Is restore salmon runs. That's water that's not available to us for our agriculture. It's not available to recharge our aquifer or other purposes. That's water that we lose. So we lose our salmon, we lose our water. What are the benefits that we get out of these dams? You know how much power we get from the Bonneville Power Administration? About 8% comes to Idaho. That's not much. And now it's not the low-cost energy anymore. So I keep asking myself, in southern Idaho, in the Magic Valley, do we really care about those dams? When you look at just the economics of it, do they benefit us? It seems that we pay all the costs of the dams, and the benefits all go to Washington. They don't care about Idaho salmon. It's not their salmon that are endangered. It's our salmon that are endangered. We don't get the benefits of the lower cost transportation, but I understand the concerns of those people in the Palouse. I want to help them so that we're not raising the cost of their transportation. But we need to sit down and think about, how do we want this future to work? What do we want Idaho and the Pacific Northwest to look like in 25 to 50 years? Because the decisions that we make today are going to make those determinations. That's why we threw this concept out here, and that's why we're out talking about it. But what we want is input from people. And we've got a lot of input, as you can well imagine. And some of it is, you've lost your mind, Simpson, and all that kind of stuff. I understand that. But this is a debate that needed to happen. And we'll have to see where it leads and what the proposals are and what people suggest and their concerns. So that's where we are. That's our general concept and what we want to do. I'm not trying to get anybody to jump on this and say, you know, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. What I'm trying to get people to do is to put down the pitchforks and say, let's have a discussion about how do we want to proceed with this. Because this is a discussion that's going to occur, whether it's by us or by someone else. Some people have said, well, a judge can't order a federal dam removed. That's true. No judge can order that. Only Congress can do that, can remove a dam. But a judge can make it so damn expensive to keep those dams. You kind of go, is this really worth it? As an example, 2 years ago, a federal judge ordered a 40,000 acre-feet of water be spilled over the dams to increase salmon return. I don't know whether that did that, or to increase smolt in the river. I don't know whether that was successful or not in doing that. It doesn't seem to have been. But that's 40,000 acre-feet of water. That cost BPA $40 million. That's $40 million that ratepayers end up paying. That's why Bonneville Power's costs are higher. Can we end the salmon wars? Can we make BPA competitive for the future? And can we restore Idaho salmon? And in doing so, can we make the stakeholders whole? That's the issues that we're looking at. So I appreciate you listening to the presentation and what we're trying to do. And all I'm trying to do is get the facts out of why we're doing what we're doing, why we're putting this concept out, and why we're encouraging people to comment on it. And as on the slides, there's our homepage and our web page and so forth that we're encouraging people to comment on.
Mr. Simpson, which dams will be specifically affected?
The 4 on the lower state. On that map, it's 5, 6, 7, and 8. It's the Lower Monumental, Ice Harbor, Lower Granite, and what? Little Goose. Those 4. It's interesting if you look back through the history of all this. Ice Harbor was the first dam to be constructed on the Lower Snake. It's the start of the 4. The 4 Lower Columbia dams were constructed before that. It was authorized by Congress in 1945. The Army Corps at the time said, let's wait before we start doing the dams on the Lower Columbia, or on the Lower Snake River, and see what the effect is on salmon of the Lower Columbia dams. 2 years later, they reversed themselves and said, "Now let's start." So they started requesting funding for that to the Appropriations Committee in the House. The House refused to put any money into starting Ice Harbor. And in 1953, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee was asked, "Why won't you fund this request for Ice Harbor that the Army Corps of Engineers continues to make?" And the chairman at the time said, because construction of that dam would mean the extinction of a species. And that's something that we cannot contemplate. Because once a species is gone, only God can replace it. But 2 years later, a Democratic senator and from Washington and one from Oregon slipped in a $1 million appropriation into a conference report to start Ice Harbor, and that started the building of the 4 dams. And they were absolutely right. I mean, in 53, we've known that. If you look back at the history of salmon, and you look what happened in Ireland and England, and the debates that went on there, and then you look at what happened on the East Coast, in the Atlantic salmon, and what happened there, and the debates that went on there, they're almost interchangeable. And then you look at what we're doing in the Pacific Northwest, it's like we're doing the same thing and expecting a different result. All of these debates could have been interchangeable. There are enough issues that affect salmon that everyone can point to something else. No, it's not the dams, it's the ocean conditions. No, it's not the ocean conditions, it's the predators. No, it's not the predators, it's the harvest. We take too many salmon. So everybody can point to something else as being the cause. The reality is you could solve all those other problems and you're still going to have a SARS rate on Idaho's salmon that is headed toward extinction. Because all of those other fish that have higher SARS rates that go into the John Day and the Columbia, or in the Yakima River Valley, go through the same things that our salmon do, except the additional 4 dams. 4 dams, they can survive. 8 dams is just too many. That's the challenge. We are working on, just a minute, we are working on predator control, and we have been doing predator control. When you look at ocean conditions, yes, ocean conditions are an issue. And there are rivers that have no dams where salmon runs are down. Absolutely true. If you look at the Fraser River in British Columbia, the numbers are down in salmon runs, and they don't have any dams. The difference is they start here, and their runs drop to here. Still sustainable, healthy runs. Ours start here and drop to here. Make no doubt about it. Idaho salmon will go extinct if something isn't done. That's the bottom line. Do we want to save them or don't we want to save them? It's up to the people of Idaho. Yeah. You're in charge of the meeting, so.
I got to make a statement first because I'm pretty sure that people don't know what I'm about to reveal. I've studied something called Agenda 21 Sustainable Development for about 8 years. Watershed is actually listed on 111. Forests are on 95. Agriculture and rural development are on 82. Human depopulation is actually early on in the chapter. Sustainable development and smart growth and wetlands and everything related to green and the Green Deal comes right out of this book. This book comes from the Library of Congress. The original documents are at un.org. What's really interesting though is, you mentioned a lot about stakeholders. Nobody ever talks about who they are. according to this document, are the UN certified NGOs or non-governmental agencies, which you seem to be supporting. It says that other international, regional, and sub-regional organizations also called upon to contribute to this effort, the broadest public participation and active involvement of non-governmental organizations and other groups. I'm trying to figure out what the three branches of government there are. The other comment I wanted to make was that in this chapter here relating to what you're talking about, it says government should set up programs for the exchange of information on conservation of biological diversity and sustainable use of biological resources. The closest I can tell is the word sustainability and the overuse of that word comes from the Rio de Janeiro conference in 1992. The United Nations is using environmentalism, and we've talked about this forever, and we've always been called crazy. The problem is it's right in your face. Alexander Ocasio-Cortez started talking about it. Simpson's website is full of that same verbiage. If you read the United Nations Agenda 21 documents, or even the close, this is 351 pages. Agenda 2030 is only 40. If you read that, you're going to find the principles there. Compare those to the World Economic Forum agenda and tell me what you see. And when you read Congressman's website, and you'll see the similarities in verbiage. This is going to be a complete re-blueprinting of the entire governmental system and measuring and monitoring and manipulation of every single thing that we do from here on out. So Congressman Simpson, I wanted to be able to ask you, you use the words a lot about what are stakeholders, you mentioned the word stakeholders. Stakeholders are not people because we're not stakeholders. You represent people. You represent the state. You represent the concerns that we have. You don't represent, or I guess we do now since the governor doesn't seem to, to support the people anymore, and neither do our legislators. But what has happened to our form of government when you adhere more to the stakeholders than you do to the people? I spoke with the commissioners in Twin Falls County today, and they said that they don't even have the ability to make a change about what you're doing. You're just letting people know. So I didn't really have a question other than who the stakeholders are. I really, really hope that you're not aware of this and that you're not working for them intentionally and that you're just ignorant on what I'm telling you. And I don't mean any disrespect in that, because it took me a long time to be able to understand this. But something is way out of whack, you guys, and we've really got to be able to get down to the brass tacks and look at the evidence of what it is. We can't just continue to be able to go along on emotion like we do with COVID. There's a whole other story that goes on, and COVID actually is related to exactly what you're promoting, by the way.
Thanks for those comments. All I'm trying to do is restore Idaho salmon runs and trying to make sure that, yes, the stakeholders, we are all stakeholders in different things. Trying to make sure that they're made whole in this whole process, and trying to design a future for Idaho that is sustainable and one that we want. And what I'm listening to are not just stakeholders, because stakeholders are people, but all people. That's where I'm coming from. I don't know anything about the UN crap. I know AOC, and she's crazy.
Are you interested in me sharing that with you to enlighten you? Because it's all right there. We've got 12.
If it's in the Library of Congress, I can get it.
We've got 12, but you guys are busy too. I mean, we've got 12 experts locally. We've got 4 nationally. I can put them in touch with you in any minute. So if you really care about Idaho, please allow me to be able to put dirt on my own face and have you help disregard what I'm saying as of no consequence. Because right now, it's got every consequence in the world. So I just appreciate you listening.
Great.
You have time for a couple more questions?
Sure. I think we do, don't we? We do, yes. Yeah.
I'm Carl Nellis. I want to thank you, Congressman, for bringing this up. It's a very important issue to me and to all of the country, actually. Everybody in this nation needs to consider this because everybody's going to pay the bill. We're going to pay either for continuing programs that haven't worked, or we're going to pay for continuing programs that might work. My preference is that we continue to pay for something that might work. And I want to thank you for this comprehensive proposal. I think it stands a chance of doing some good.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. It is, I will tell you that it became much more comprehensive than we ever envisioned when we started with all this, it would have been, it was pretty narrowly focused when we started, but then it's one of those things that when you start pulling a string here, it pulls a string over here and another string, it's all interrelated, and that's what's making it, what makes it so broad-based and comprehensive and complicated, frankly, for a lot of people, including me, to understand. Yeah.
What is the position of the legislators who preside over the area where the 4 dams are at? What is their position on it?
If you're talking about the members of Congress, Kathy McMorris Rogers, most of these dams are in her district. Newhouse to some degree, they're opposed to it, obviously. I understand that. You know, and we're still friendly. Dan Newhouse and I work on a lot of things together and talk about a lot of things, and we've had discussions on this. He understands the concern I have about Idaho salmon. What bothers me is when some of them say things like, hey, listen, I want salmon back in Idaho as much as anybody does. What that generally means is I want salmon back in Idaho as much as anybody does, as long as I don't have to change anything I'm doing. Well, that just doesn't work. But those legislators are opposed to it. Russ Fulcher has come out opposed to it, wrote an editorial with them. He represents Port Lewiston. I understand that. And I'm not critical of them for that. What I want is the broader discussion among Idahoans. I'm going to spend some time also in Washington talking to those people, and I'll survive. And I'm also going to be talking to some people in Portland. One of the questions people always ask is, well, what about flood control? These are not flood control dams. These are the run-of-the-river dams. Their only purpose was to produce power. And the added benefit was if you put a lock in there, you could barge too. And you know, it's fascinating to read the history of all this and how it developed. And I understand how it developed. We all thought that this was the right thing to do. We could increase the power. It was necessary. In fact, the reason that Ice Harbor was built, the main reason, was to provide power for the Hanford Reservation, the nuclear facility there. So it was national security. That power is no longer necessary. And we thought, okay, we can handle this. If we lose salmon, hatcheries, that'll do the trick. Guess what? Hatcheries don't do the trick. In fact, to a large degree, they hurt wild salmon. So a lot of things that we tried in the past, as I said, I wish somebody would come up and tap me with a magic wand and say, this is how you do it. But we've tried everything else. I don't know what else to try. But this is an ongoing conversation with legislators, members of Congress and the Senate from the Pacific Northwest. Right now, everybody's kind of taken a seat saying, okay, this is pretty comprehensive. Let's see how the public reacts to Simpson's concept here before they get on board. We're also getting some good positive feedback from some people. The two things that I keep failing to bring up. 2 examples I use. I don't want Idaho to be spotted owl or Klamath. Those are 2 verbs that I've come up with now. You all remember the spotted owl wars that happened over in Oregon in the timber industry. The resource people, the timber people, were told, just keep fighting. If you fight this long enough, we'll win. Guess what? They didn't. Spotted owl won. And that timber industry in western Oregon is gone now. I talked to a member here in Idaho, a friend in Idaho that grew up in a small timber community in Oregon, said it just devastated the whole timber industry in the Pacific Northwest. Because nobody sat down and said, okay, can we come to some accommodation to try and save the timber industry and also do what's necessary to save the spotted owl, whatever you think about that. But it was just keep fighting. And the spotted owl won. The second one is the Klamath Basin. For the first hearing I went on when I was a member of Congress was the Klamath Basin with Greg Walden, who was a new member of Congress with me. And they were having salmon wars there, still have them. You have 4 dams on the Klamath. None of them are as comprehensive as these 4 dams on the lower Snake River, but they have 4 dams that block salmon runs. Continual lawsuits, judges' orders, et cetera, same thing that's been happening up in the lower Snake. They got together, the tribes, the farmers in the area, and the environmental groups got together and reached an agreement. The tribes were going to subordinate their water rights to the agricultural producers. That's amazing. Tribes never do that. But they were going to subordinate their water rights to the agricultural producers. Tribes were going to get about 200,000 acres of forest land, I think that's the amount, of forest land to manage for the tribes. The environmentalists were going to get the 4 dams removed to return salmon. They all came to this agreement. They brought it to Congress because they had to pass Congress. And Congress refused to pass it because they had the word dam removal in there. So it never made it to the floor. Guess what's happening today? In 2024, those 4 dams are going to be removed and no one's going to be compensated for it, even though they came to an agreement. I don't want that to happen to Idaho. I don't want that to happen in the Pacific Northwest. That's why I want to have this discussion. And I understand there are going to be people that come up and say, "You're just crazy." That's okay. My goal is try to help us design our future instead of having our future designed for us by someone else. One more?
Yeah, let's do one more question, please.
Okay.
Seems to me that our country's headed to a real economic crash. And all our federal government wants to do is print more money and pass more money out for this, that, and the other. And also, our NGOs have become so powerful, and the tribes, that all you do is listen to them because they have so much money and so much clout in your arena. I think it's time to listen to the people, and the tribes need to go along with what everybody else has to follow nowadays. Times are different. It's not back when the white man came across the country and the salmon were in the rivers by the thousands. It's a different world. They need to abide by the same laws as everybody else in our country needs to abide by.
Well,
And
I
that
agree.
doesn't mean gill netting on the river. I mean, if they took part of the harvest down, took the predation out of it, the seals, the whales, sea lions, it would make a considerable difference. We'd get more than 3,200 up the river.
I don't think that's true, but I appreciate your comments. The reality is those gill nets that they used to use, the harvesting and stuff, affects all the runs, whether they're going up the Snake River or the Yakima or the John Day. The only difference is the Idaho salmon have to go over 4 additional dams. But I appreciate what you're saying, but how many of you are members of tribes here in the room? Raise your hand. How many of you are a member of an NGO? Raise your hands. That's what I'm doing, is listening to people. That's why I'm here today. So don't tell me all I do is go listen to the NGOs or the tribes. I listen to people. I listen to Idahoans. That's why this is put out as a concept, so that I can get your input.
But they're the
On what
people
we're trying to do.
filing all the lawsuits, increasing the overhead.
And so, what do you want us to do about that?
You guys need to stand up to them.
And say what? That's what the spotted owl people were told too.
How about upholding the Constitution? That'd be a good way to stand. That way you could just.
The Endangered Species Act is the Endangered Species Act passed by Congress.
Well, you can rescind it.
No, you can't.
Why can't you?
Because there are not enough votes and never will be enough
Oh, that's
votes.
true. You got me there, boss.
That's the reality.
You got me there? Appreciate it.
There will never be enough votes to rescind the Clean Water Act. Neither do I think we should. We've done some things that are very important with the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act. I remember as a kid, I used to drive through Los Angeles when We went down to a baseball tournament one time when I was there. We had Idaho All-Stars that won a trip to Los Angeles, and we were on a bus, and your eyes were just watering from all the smog and stuff. You haven't seen the Cuyahoga River start on fire spontaneously, as it used to do all the time, because of the Clean Water Act. So we made progress in a lot of areas. The idea of just coming and saying, well, we'll repeal those laws, that's just not gonna happen. How do you work within them for the benefit of the people of Idaho and the Pacific Northwest? That's what we're attempting to do. That's why I'm out getting input from everybody and trying to answer their questions and listen to their suggestions. Yeah.
One quick suggestion is why isn't there a commission of Idahoans formed, basically citizens and officials, to research this situation and then offer solutions? Is there anybody out there doing this in Idaho?
Well, the governor had a task force.
Well, I'm not talking about the governor, I'm talking about citizens, Idaho citizens, not Idaho government.
Well, he put together the task force, and it was Idaho citizens that were on the task force. And it was pretty comprehensive, representing people from all aspects of this. And they actually did, I read their report, read it a couple times. They actually did a really good job, but they were the things that they could reach consensus on. Yeah, let's increase the habitat. Okay, that's great. And we can have the best habitat in the world. In fact, Idaho has the best habitat in the world for salmon. Doesn't do them much good if you can't get there. And so, but they made some really good recommendations, and I compliment them. And now they've got a group that is a government group where the 4 governors got together and appointed a representative to try to address this situation from each of the 4 states. And I don't know what they're going to come up with, or if anything, but we'll see. But there was a citizens group, and I will tell you that there were environmentalists, there were people in the fishing industry, there were people from the what's that?
Power Council.
Yeah, from the Power Council to the Port of Lewiston to other people, agricultural community and everything else. It was pretty broad-based, and I thought they did a really good job. But that has already taken place, and they spent about 2 years? 2 years going over this. Yeah.
Going back to the stakeholders, do you have any minutes or notes of meetings that you had with these stakeholders that maybe we could look at? And then we can see who the stakeholders are and the points, their side, the points that they are bringing up?
I don't have any minutes from those because we don't sit down with a stenographer to take minutes as we're discussing things with these different individuals. Just like there's no minutes from this meeting, I don't think. But we certainly have a list of the thousands of people that we've met with. So,
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate Congressman Simpson and his staff coming, and I appreciate, of course, everybody coming and you answering questions and presenting the ideas. And so thank you very much, everybody.